Before I speak of this tale, I must warn thee of the tares which hath been writ of. Horrors of the flesh, be it mutation or gore, and soul horror follow, as does the depravity of apathy and the deprivations of the wilds upon the human body. Hail and well met to the reader of this tale. This venture is titled The Avarice of Pedros Gallus, and was transcribed by Ventures League scribe Cato Melitus Augreo, he, him. This transcript is written to the best memory and ability of the scribe. To all who read this record, be mindful of the horrors of the flesh and mutagenic, visceral, and soul forms, as well as the depravity of apathy and the deprivations of the wilds upon the human body. Hearken these words and remember them for all those that were, are, and shall be. In the year 4861 AR, the Espańii mayor, Pedros Gallus, of the town of Crisco, implemented a tax increase of 2% upon his citizens. This tax increase paid for the hiring of the Los Certatos mercenary company to station the broken walls of the town following a malarian miasmatic ravage that left the town open to assault by external forces. With the increased flow of inherited coinage, the town's local economy could pay the tax easily enough, even if begrudgingly. Los Certatos mercenaries kept hold of the town and defended it from the onslaught of brigands for a year. In 4862 AR, the tax increase was from 2% to an astonishing 14%. The drastic increase, while able to be paid, stirred the locals into a frenzy. Pedros Gallus assured the people that this increase was to pay the mercenaries who had lost some of their numbers and would need to buy out the dead's place. The documents presented were sufficient. From 4862 AR to 4866 AR, Criscoans paid 35% of their annual income and production to Pedros Gallus. After so many years, the population of trained soldiers had increased enough to reduce Los Certatos' presence. However, Pedros Gallus said otherwise. Any person who denied the need to keep the annual taxation at 35% was beaten and arrested by Los Certatos, then fined 8 silver reals. Many people were found guilty many times over, and because of this, their families paid the fines until they were as poor as they once were. And still they were expected to pay. If they could not pay the fines or taxes, they were beaten until they could. Persons with a usable skill were placed in cells to work off their debt. The growing tension erupted in 4869 AR, when a candidate named Pedros Honoris rallied support and demanded Gallus step down from office. Los Certatos mercenaries fought with citizens in the streets and slaughtered 21 townspeople. Pedros Honoris had to flee to the neighboring village of Asenscia for his life. That is when the Mucho Sangres mercenary company entered negotiations to reclaim the town. During this time, strange omens occurred in Crisco. Fat black birds flew about town for days on end. Townspeople found the birds' innards to be full of silver and gold. Wise persons would go about town saying not to take the riches from these birds, for to do so would be to invite death. By order of Pedros Gallus, any heretic to the will of Pluto and Ethrema was publicly hanged, and all their property forfeit under the old law of clemency. Persons of all strides tossed stones and arrows at the birds to get their wealth. It became so commonplace that black feathers lined the streets, and the corpses of these birds piled up in every destitute corner. Los Certatos mercenaries beat any they suspected of having bird coinage, then gave some of the money to Pedros Gallus. A madness took over every house. Money had become a thing rather than a tool. Everything could be sold for the right price. Apprentices and familial aides were sold off like slaves to perform tasks. The practice of whoring became common, and any person who had taken the trade was almost always robbed. Merchants peddling their wares from afar were cheated and robbed in Crisco. Eventually, the town grew into a state of vagabonds. Persons would not pay their fair price for anything either way, and fights between thieves were ended with the brutal crackdown of Los Ceratatos soldiers. Each of the mercenaries wore a golden badge of office they had all replaced with yellow painted badges so they could smelt down the gold, since the smiths would steal as well. Scars turned into broken bones, then into murder. By the law of claimants, any person who killed another had right to the property of the slain. That is, if the person was not slain themselves. Soon enough, Pedros, Honoris, and all other surrounding settlements watched as thieves from Crisco slinked out of the walls like rats into the grain bins of other places. Taxes had increased to paying 82% of one's earnings or production by the year 4871 AR. Out of the need for common good, the muchos sangres agreed to stall their costs until this blight of greed was rid. Pedros Honoris and 200 muchos sangres mercenaries marched from Asenscia to Crisco for a day and a half. The ground around Crisco grew sour. The vibrant green turned black. The soil dried and cracked. Holes and tunnels lay all about the land from ill-fated searches for wealth. Carrion beasts feasted freely on stripped corpses. Closer inspection revealed signs of butchery. The stench of corruption was metallic, like coins grasped in a tight, sweaty clutch. The gates to Crisco had been broken open. The heavy wooden doors, reinforced by thick iron studs and bars, were stripped. The portcullis was removed. Everything that could be sold was ravaged. Prayers from soldiers and hired priests alike soured on the tongue with a metallic tinge. When the glistening arms and armor entered the towns, all at once they were beset by mutated vagabonds. This attack repelled the muchos sangres, who found themselves assailed wherever they went by horrors they did not expect and did not prepare for. The battle was hard, and the valiant dead would be honored forever, even if they never struck a blow. The muchos sangres and a mutilated Pedros Honoris fled to Asenscia and put out the call for venturers. In 4872 AR, the Bear Gas Spitters venturing party was hired to put down the terror with the rest of the muchos sangres. The Bear Gas Spitters consisted of the primogenitus human Melona the Saint-Breaker, she-her, the stunted human Leonita of Sparticia, she-her, and the halfling human Darius Boulder-Shoulder, he-him. The venturers heard the call to battle and spend much time consulting omen speakers and archives for whatever may be afflicting the town. Once they had acquired sufficient knowledge, they set forth from Castello Sarosa by ship and arrived in 4873 AR. When they rode to Asenscia, the sky had grown dark in the distance, as if all the color had been stolen from the sky, and not even the Dacrian sun would dare pass over it. Asenscia's grass already began withering. The trees in the distance were sparse. They had been cut down to keep warding fires going at all times. The soot-stained workers hauling chopped logs to the fire shook from exhaustion. They were emaciated like a corpse. The sight of them was like beholding sapient undead. Upon their arrival, the Bear Gas Spitters were greeted by a broken man. Pedros Honoris rolled out of the village on a simple wheelchair. Muchos sangres mercenaries wore thick cloth armor, more uncommon in other parts of the world, and wielding wooden spears double the length of normal ones. Pedros Honoris was a man whose body was once a gore-splattered mess. The frame of a once sturdy orc human farmer was emaciated as well. Claw marks around his neck and wrists were deeply gouged into the flesh. He was missing nearly half of his fingers. One of his legs was twisted in an unnatural way, where a copper leg torque was firmly latched. The venturers were greeted warmly and offered what rations were Honoris's. Out of respect, the venturers gave all their food to whomever they could. Crisco's malady sapped the land of all its life. The mutated vagabonds from the town ventured further and further afield to steal. Other villages had tried appeasing the mutants with offerings of wealth. Villages were ransacked entirely. The emaciated creatures stole money first, before killing the people and feasting on them out of unwanted necessity. Animals they had tried to sell to each other in a vain attempt at economy. Gold, silver, copper, then other metals were always taken first. The leeching of the land spread with every raid. Fire kept the creatures occupied and began infighting when the glimmer of metal made each one realize there was more money to be had in the hoard of their fellows. The almanacs bade a dire time fast approaching, when the convergence of the Dacrian sun and the meridian moon would unite the opposite welts of the heavens, then make a world where the dreadful creatures could have their way. Rumors from hunters even said that they had seen beasts like us, clad in metallic opulence they would never wear. The venturers could not be paid in any metallic wealth, for to do so would only attract the creatures. So it was that the venturers could be paid after they completed the grim cleansing. The first duty was to travel along the paths of the vagabonds. Into the gloom of the sparse forests, the venturers traveled with their weapons drawn and coins jostling in pouches audibly and visibly ahead of the muchos sangres. It did not take long for a pack of the horse to descend upon them. They were hunchbacked creatures curled up to the best hide their loot while running. In one arm, they each held some form of weapon, and in another they held loot. For thin abhorrence, they struck fast and piled in on any sign of wealth. Each of the fiends made mad grabs for the wealth they could. Long, spindly fingers grabbed coin purses. This was anticipated. The purses were woven into straps, making it hard to yank off. The creatures let out strangled cries of effort. They wasted all their strength in trying to take what they could see. Rage blazed across their snarling, skull-like visages. In return, the venturers lifted their weapons and hacked and hewed. Each one fell with a sickening crack. When their plunder was removed or slashed at, they scrambled to collect it all, or withered and died. Only one was left alive. Its weapon-wielding arm was cut off, and its teeth were kicked in, leaving the thing disarmed, as it would not, perhaps even could not, let go of the coin satchels it held in the other arm. Leonita's cold Spartician forwardness commanded the thing to lead the venturers back to its den in exchange for money. Without fail, the creature folded and compromised itself. It would lead the venturers to its lair if it was able to keep the loot and take whatever they offered. As a gesture of good faith, the venturers tossed the coin purse with the golden coins from 4 lands. The gangrenous mutant's eyes widened. Black spheres stared greedily at the coinage. Even the glimmer of its eyes was a commodity, it seemed, for it had none. Along the path, The venturers saw the remnants of plundered villages. Each of them spoke a prayer of rest for the dead. The creatures sneered and hissed, but did nothing. Skirmishes with the creatures were frequent and tiring. Every few yards, one popped up out of a hollow and attacked the party, only to be slain quickly. The guide commanded the venturers to carry the stinking loot on the condition they bind their fingers so they could not count.
"No fingers means no calculations. My coin all,"
it screeched. The venturers begrudgingly agreed, and wore mittens used to hold hot drinking vessels. In their heads, the venturers counted more wealth than any of them had ever seen in a year in the growing collection of the creature. The venturers were about 30 minutes ahead of the muchos sangres, based on how far the sound of marching feet was. When the need to sleep set upon the party, it took a bribe of a silver-engraved book of prayers to get the guide to stop. Malona bit her tongue as she saw her prayer book be torn apart for the shiny components by sharp nails. Fire roared to life, and indeed the creature became enthralled by the glimmer of metal. The grandness of its treasury was rapturous. The thing kneeled in prayer, and its hunch-back straightened. The sound would have made any but a venturer queasy. The creature stared at the metal, then collapsed into a twitching mess from the sheer amount of wealth it possessed. Over the course of the night, the venturers rotated shifts to maintain the fire and keep vigil. Down the wild path, many fires were lit where the muchos sangres made camp. Morning's rise was dulled by the shadows. As the party moved ever into the sapped wilds, everything was desiccated. Trenches and makeshift mines carved up the grayish sands. Attacks from the mutated Criscoans increased in frequency. They lunged from shadows, dragging hordes of treasure and satchels sewn into their skin. Despite the weight of the metals on them, the Criscoans attacked with fervor. They did not feel pain and only fled when they were near death. Their scampering did not save them from the justice of the blade. From behind the party came the hastened trudges of the muchos sangres. When battle was joined, the mercenaries charged into the fray, tossing coins at the avaricious hedonites while screaming the names of their fallen comrades. The ravenous creatures fell upon the group, attacked by the profits they could steal from the dead. As they tore into mercenary and venturer, they shouted the value of items they spied. It seemed for each attack they made against the warrior, the things made against each other. In these moments could a swing land true and kill them. Criscoans did not leave the marred land even when the threat of death was imminent. The desire to want had overtaken all desires to live. Even when their limbs were hewn off, the creatures held onto their stash with nubs and teeth. Much vengeance was enacted, and debts repaid in kind. But the day had not yet been won. The assembled band of soldiers made their way through the desolate landscape slowly. Every few yards was earned by killing another of the depraved things. When at last they made it to the gates of Crisco, the city itself had mutated. All the brightness and glimmer of stones had been chipped away and kept in stores. Frameworks were hollowed out, and etched sigils of malicious protection warned what may happen if a thief dare try to take the hidden riches. In a square the force arrayed themselves in. They would not be taken by surprise this time. The roadway was rough and dirty now, the marble of the streets removed long ago. Above them was a dark sky, twisted to give only the light of fog. The vermin of the city and any pets left within had long since been devoured by the twisted fiends that once were human. Every warrior steeled themselves when they heard the clatter and clang of clinking coins like water on a shingle. The hail of sound came from every space, followed by devolved grumbles of envy. From every place came the hordes of thieves. They were more regal, if such a thing could be said, than the dregs outside of the walls. Some adorned themselves in a brightly polished mail and wielded finely kept weapons. With each stain the creatures gained on their fine war gear, a frenzy was put within them. They howled in wrath and swung with ever more intensity, unaware their actions only bloodied their precious items more. Some had cut holes in their skin and let the flesh go around the coins and jewelry they wore. A wound rot seeped from these adornments, but did not seem to hamper the creatures. One, a bloated terror, swung a large wooden beam about. When a blade gutted it, the fiend's wealth poured from its belly onto the floor. The sight was such an alluring opium. The mutants, in their vanity, charged their fellow and tore it to shreds in search for more. Witnessing the ferocity drove several of the mucho sangres mad with fear and confusion as to how mortals could degrade themselves so. The Ventures and mucho sangres slew these dregs easily. Rusty, rotted blood clotted and fell, polishing any metal things that it touched to a bright mirror shine. This served only to attract more. The journey to Gallus's home was a slow, bitter assault. Los Ceratatos mutants proved to be the most troublesome. Whatever mutation afflicted the Los Ceratatos was deeply rooted in their souls. Every wound they suffered could be healed by tossing a coin into the bloody dirt, then lamenting its loss. Battle wit hadn't left them either. The Mucho Sangres lines clashed with the Los Ceratatos, red and blue fighting, hacking, killing wantonly. Darius barreled through the line, opening a space for mercenaries to break the ragged defenses. The Venturers continued charging ahead to Gallus. The broken door was easily busted open. The Venturers searched every room. Leonita entered first and gasped at the sight that made her shriek in terror. Pedros Gallus coiled on the floor. His legs had fattened into a long worm-like tail, which his feeble arms continuously stuffed into his distended mouth. His skin was sallow and transparent, allowing for the Venturers to see his gilded innards stuffed like a bag of coins. His eyes had grown black, but reflected the glitter of gold. All about him were piles and towers of money, more beyond any that could feasibly be within the town and ransacked villages. The wealth encircled him like jaws. Gilders and smiths worked endlessly to smelt the coins into bars, then forge them anew into newer coins. Mutated bookkeepers counted the wealth on scales, then denoted and scrawled values in distilled blood devoid of any irony smell. The Venturers readied themselves. The work kept on as usual. Hesitantly, the Venturers stepped into the room, far grander than what the building could feasibly hold, and marveled at the artistry of precious metals on display. Rivers of smelted gold flowed like smooth lava into bar channels. Spirits dutifully took these bars from the molds and marked them with evil. Malona grabbed her sword and hacked at Gallus. The creature did not seem to care that a blade cut at its swollen flesh until he was in twain and bleeding. His eyes were dull and ever staring at his wealth. The fiend gurgled and spat in its dying moments. When the venturers struck their weapons against the coins, a moment of quiet followed as work halted. The mutants snapped into reality and charged the venturers with everything they had. Mounds of coins fell too, seeking to rush the venturers. Like crashing waves, the coins surged into one another, pelting the warriors and mutants with money. The avaricious mutants attacked with well-trained acuity. Whenever one of the venturers fell, they felt microfractures form in their bones from landing on coins. Malona dragged herself up from the piles, burying her and smashed the skull of a mutant against an oncoming surge. Darius grabbed from his pouch a scroll with a ward of banishing on it and began reading. Mammon, immortal of greed and wealth, I cast you out. May the expense of your life pale in comparison to the charity of love. May humble hands be not idle on purse. May they cast you out to forge a blade of truthful metals to strike at the beast, the spirit, and the unquiet dead. Mammon, immortal of greed and wealth, be gone from this land, for I am poor by mine own hands. My wealth is my charity, my hoard my kin, and my gold my soul. The air burned hot enough that the skin on the venturers started to peel, and the flesh bubbled while blood boiled in shriveled veins. Every coin melted into a weighty slop. The vagabond mutants were dragged with euphoric smiles, followed by agonized, silent pleas for mercy, when the precious slag scorched away their bodies and cast their twisted souls into ingots. The sludge pooled at the venturer's feet and coalesced into a hand that reached for gold and silver on its foes. Mammon be gone, you lonely immortal, whose friends are not but silent shining rock! Leonita shrieked before casting her spear into the hand. Malona rushed to the hand and leapt. With one great throw, she gave the immortal manifestation that which greed cannot own. Air. The hand melted into a pool, a cool pile of copper, silver, and gold. The room started shrinking to its decrepit original size. The dangerous pool of ore shriveled and broke before the party's very eyes. Leonita fell to her back and let out a desperate cry of thanks her newfound madness had instilled in her. From the rest of the house, the Mucho Sangres announced victory. The evil had been slain and banished. By order of Malona, victory would not be won by looting, but by cleansing. Every coin the mercenaries possessed was tossed on top of the slag. If one resisted or was caught stealing, their hands was cut off and their wealth tossed into the pile for them. The dead mutants were tossed onto the pile too. Prayers of condemnation were spoken, but in the sullen eyes of Leonita, a truly horrid fate was inflicted by Mammon. The dead were stripped and carried out of the town to be buried in Sacintan graves. Though the spirits were gone, the darkness remained, and so it would for many, many years. A bombardment of Crisco began the following year with heavy stones cast from afar. The boulders smashed the walls and the buildings within. There was no mourning the vast treasure hoard, for the rotted corpse of Pedros Gallus was not buried by stone, but by the god Wealth. Priests of nature blessed irrigated waters that drowned the dry earth. Each coven of hieromancers who came by wove ley lines into a net that trapped the evil of Mammon. Green rifts tore open and were stitched as the aethers of the immortal realm. Plants not of this realm sprouted and twisted into forms unlike rooted life, and died so their carcasses may pierce the polluted ground and smother out the corruption. Every few months a person would begin displaying the greedy stigmata in need to be slain. All persons entering the area were stripped naked, save for ordained tools, so to halt any covetousness and ensure persons did not stash tilled up coin and jewelry into their pockets. Sacintan farmers and laborers were levied to quell the hostile nature, driven mad with rage at the human atrocities. Thus was the venture done, and Mammon banished from the land. Transcriptum terminus. The efforts of the Sicintans from 4873 to 4899 AR to purge Crisco of its evil ended successfully. Following the expulsion of the Meridian immortal, known as Mammon, Sacinta laid claim to the reborn lands as stewards. Over the years, it had attracted many persons willing to freely help. The village began growing into a town with Pedros Honoris as its mayor from 4873 AR to 4009 AR. When he died, due to the stress of the wounds he suffered in body and mind. Sacinta had since been renamed Candida, as every person is now considered to be the most honest. To prevent another corruption like in Crisco, all Candidans wore tight white, almost sheer clothes without pockets or satchels. One's wealth is in how little they carry. Foreigners entering the town are summarily stripped and have their pockets and satchels sewn up. The only persons allotted a modicum of covetous clothes are adventurers, as without their many, many things, the world would not have its protectors. As of 5025 AR, Candida still holds this practice, but some color has been introduced in their garb. All business involving coin is done in a shanty station, a half-mile out of town, easily in range of the grand trebuchets willing to bury any avaricious intruders. Archivist occultatum scholars have noted the mutation in their records. May that which is blind see, and may that which blinds be unseen. Venturers encountering similar mutants are to consult this account in the records of the Archivus Occultatum. And to all those who were, are, and shall be that read this account, glory to you. Tales of Mortality is a world-building podcast set in the world of Asenscia, created and owned by Bard over 18 years and counting. It is a fantasy world of horror and madness, a planet racked by mutation and magic, where humanity survives only through itself and the Spirit Indomitable against horrors natural and unnatural. The Worldbuilder, writer, producer, and artist of the thumbnail is Bard. Me! Below is a transcription of lore, as well as a link to my Instagram, Bard of the Mad Realm, where I share art related to Asenscia. Thank you all for listening to Tales of Mortality. May chaos reign. Bye-bye.